like.
Tanya's gonna go first.
Good morning. I would love to encourage everyone who's here, Tanya Coogan, the Director of Membership, to come down to the membership booth. Make sure you renew your membership. Everybody needs to get a button, right?
Membership lounge.
Membership. Yeah, there you go. You can play golf, you can have a Kit Kat, you can renew your membership. But please stop by. We're up to, I think, 838, Brenda?
Yes.
The other thing is if you renew on site, you can do it sitting at a table, you can do it at the lounge, you can do it in the middle of a session, not during this one, because it's going to be amazing. But we put you into a drawing for some of our Land's End merch, so please do that. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Greg, who's gonna whip us into shape at 7 in the morning. Good luck.
All right. Thank you, Tanya. And good morning, everyone. So I'm Greg Kohn. I'm the Chief Growth Officer with an organization called Virtual Incorporated. It's my pleasure to be here. When Tanya asked me to come and talk to the leaders of TEI, I had two requirements. Number one, that it had to be before 8 a.m. and there had to be a lot of coffee. So thank you for squeezing that in. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I just want to talk a little bit about me, because I think that'll set some context about why I'm here to talk about leadership and why I'm here to talk about leadership with this kind of group. I've been in the association space and field for over 25 years. The predominant amount of my experience has been in technology or scientific-based organizations. I've also been the leader of a few standards organizations. Move my thing back here. And basically, I simply love to help organizations grow, and I love to help them find ways to get better. At Virtual, I lead a team of advisors that do strategic work across not only our client organizations, but organizations across the nonprofit and association space. My team and myself have had the pleasure to work for some of the most fantastic organizations in the world, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Bank. One of my favorites was the Future of Fish, and we helped them build a global alliance to create standards in seafood traceability. And I learned so much about not only seafood traceability, but just how supply chains and ecosystems come together. I am a serial consumer of everything having to do with business and leadership, and anytime I have a chance to share even a little bit of the knowledge and wisdom I've acquired over the years, that's great. And then I always add in the last bullet, just that's my aspiration. It hasn't happened yet, but someday, this is a bad spot. Someday I hope that it really will. I usually also, add in here that I have, one of my prevailing characteristics is I have 4 children. And I stopped adding that into my bio slide because I'm like, well, I want them to think that I'm smart. Like, why would I have 4 children? Like, that kind of deflates my, but now that I'm here with tax people, maybe I should have added that. Like, okay, that's a lot of deductions. This guy's good. He's on the mark. But I'm really thrilled to be here. What I've learned about TEI in a short amount of time coming into this has been fantastic. This is a great organization, and I hope that a few of the things I share this morning help make it even better. So today's theme, I really believe that across all parts of life, little steps going forward can make a really giant impact, and I really believe that's the case in TEI. As Wayne said in his introduction, this is a really fantastic organization, but really when you think about the structure of any organization like this, it's what happens at that smallest component level, the chapters, the local communities, the regions. That's really the lifeblood of the organization, and if you can make that part of your organization and your community better and stronger, it just filters up and it makes the whole of TEI better. So even if folks in this room can take one or two little nuggets from what I present here, bring it back to your own chapter or your own local part of the organization, I really think that you're going to start seeing some great throughput. And again, speaking of business books, I really look at TEI of everything that I learned. You're a really fantastic organization, but you also just have a tremendous ability and upside to make this really a world-class organization. Not better this than today, but there's a real excitement and thirst for growth and continuous evolution. So where we want to start, I don't know if we have any golfers in the room, but I follow golf, and one of the golfers that I like is Justin Thomas. He's a great young golfer. And at the end of the PGA Tour season last year, he posted this on his Twitter account. And I fell in love with it the minute that I saw this. Because this is, in my view, one of the most clear examples of someone starting out and just writing down some goals. This isn't fancy. It's not in a 10-page glossy document. It's in an iPhone notebook page, and this guy can afford a whole team of strategists and things like that to make it really fancy. And these are the things that he set to do at the start of the season, and then he scored himself at the end of the season. And it's really, really simple. And you can just eyeball this and say, okay, check, check, not check, not check. And the real beauty of this is, when you come through the season, he kind of knows by what he didn't achieve, what he needs to do for the next year. So I love the simplicity of this, and I really love the accountability of this. I'm also a firm believer in all stages of life that people and teams do better when they write down goals, and particularly when their goals have measurable outcomes tied to them. It's the simplest little thing to do that probably has the biggest impact for any group, whether it's a chapter, an organization as a whole. And I really believe that measurement is really important, because then you get a chance to look back, just like Justin did at the end of his season, whether it's after a quarter, after a year, after 3 years, you get to look back and say, hey, how did we do? Did we make progress? And I think generally you'll always find that you made some progress. Maybe not all the progress that you wanted to do, but those are now your new goals for the next period going forward. And really, every group, every team always wants to move forward. It's the old adage, if you're not moving forward, you're stopping and you're not thriving. Measurements, again, it doesn't have to be a fancy measurement, but just saying, hey, we're going to do something, that's just a checkbox. You want to do something that's pushing yourself or pushing your team or pushing your group to do better than where it was before, or to address things that you identified as important or opportunities and things like that. And then again, good teams learn from not meeting their goals. I think a lot of times in corporations and in other group settings, you shy away from the hard discussion about, well, we didn't meet our goal. We're going to look past that. Let's just talk about what we did. It's talking about what you didn't achieve generally that can lead to really great breakthroughs and really help you hone in on how you can do better next year, or maybe these red items are the ones that become your goals for next year. You're doing pretty good on the green. So set goals. They don't have to be fancy. They can be in a bulleted list. But if your team or your chapter, comes together to do that, I think you're going to be better right off the bat if you're not doing that today. So I learned in a design workshop that you always want to bring a little bit of you personally into your presentations. So I'm not sure I picked the right picture of my garage to show you who I am, but I wanted to use it to make the point. But this is not, it could have been my garage at one point in time when I had those 4 kids and there's bicycle parts and all that. But anyway, organizational clutter is one of my pet peeves. It just accumulates, it builds up, and it really gets in the way of forward progress. I've worked with so many organizations and so many groups, and the default is always to get excited about the new things. Like, who's not excited about the new things? Oh, we're going to go off and do this. Oh, we're so excited, we're going to do that. Well, what happens is you You keep throwing things into your organizational garage. And the littlest thing that has one of the biggest impacts from my perspective is you always have to take a step back and take stock of what you're doing as a group or what you're doing as a team. Are all of those things still necessary? Are they still on point? Are they still driving the same objective as they were when you set off to do them in the first place? TEI is a volunteer organization, and this is particularly true down at the chapter level. You really have to be mindful of the scarcity of resources. The more things that you add, the more programs that you bring into your orbit as a chapter, those are more things that your set of volunteers have to do, have to manage, have to pay attention to. And I'm guessing that, like most organizations, TEI is looking to get more volunteers. You don't have an embarrassment of riches of, well, we have too many volunteers, so we need more programs. We need something for them to do. Easy rule that I like to share with organizations is every time you consider adding something, challenge yourself to take something away, to stop something. And what this does is it gives you balance, and it makes sure that you're not, creating organizational clutter, and you're not having so many initiatives that you're not doing any of them well. Again, the adage of high-performing teams is they focus on just a few things. They do those really well. Once you accomplish those, you move on to a new set of goals. Taking one thing out of here, start something, stop something, and even do that in your own life. It makes a big impact. Know your job, do your job. If you've ever watched, there's YouTube videos of this. If you've ever watched what goes into a Formula One race car getting a pit stop, it takes about 42 seconds and the whole car basically gets dismantled and put back on the road. The only way this works is that every person on this team knows exactly what their job is. And they know exactly what the job is of everyone around them, and it works like an orchestra. Everyone is playing the right notes at the right time. Chapter leadership is the same, organizational leadership is the same. What I find when I work with groups and teams, et cetera, is there's lots of assumptions. Humans like to make assumptions. Well, I think this person does the tires, and I think they do that, and I think they do that, or I think this is my role. I don't know, so I'm just going to do it. Again, little steps make a big difference, just like for goals. Taking time to write out some bullets. Okay, this is what we want to achieve for the year. Write out bullets of what all of your leadership roles are expected to do within your chapter, within your organization. It doesn't have to be onerous. It could be 4 or 5 bullets, but it makes a big impact. It clarifies and it gives everyone a line of sight. Okay, if I'm the chapter chairperson or chapter president, here's what my job is, here's what the job is. And these can be for temporary roles. Okay, if we're running an event and someone is the point person for the event, what are they expected to do? Because if you don't set expectations, generally you're not going to get the right results that you expected. The other thing is when you set expectations and you write job descriptions, you can hang those out. When you're doing a call for volunteers within your chapter and say, hey folks, we need someone to step up and help us do something, whether it's on a standing basis or a temporary basis. The biggest value or asset that people have is their time in a volunteer organization. So if you set realistic expectations of time, well, to lead a chapter, it's going to take about 5 hours a week. For the rest of the year, but to be the leader of an event that we're having in August, maybe it's 5 hours a week for 3 months, and it gives people an opportunity to say, well, can I really afford to jump into this role? I know what the time expectation is of that. And then one little trick that I learned, I worked with a really fantastic organization. This was at the national level, but the chairman of the board of the group gave performance reviews for all of the board members of his group. They weren't fancy, they weren't formal, but twice a year he sat down with every member of his board and said, hey, how am I doing as a chair? It's a great way to get self-assessment and feedback, but it was a great idea for him to say, hey, you lead this committee, you have this job on the board, every board member had a job. Here's how I think you're doing, and it was just a conversation. And what comes out of those conversations just frankly enriches the board and the leadership group and things like that. Conversations among leaders are always great things, and the more that you can build in little hooks to make sure that they happen on a regular basis, that's terrific. Data, I love data. You can do amazing things with data. You can also get overwhelmed by data. So I like to find a balance somewhere. The key to many things for organizations and associations, I do a lot of strategy work, and the worst thing that can happen for a group or an association is what I call the field of dreams effect. If we build it, they will come. You have a group of leaders, a board, whatever it might be. They sit in their boardroom, they drink lots of coffee, and they come up with great plans for, what the members want, what the members need, and things like that. And the fatal flaw is that they never asked. They just made assumptions like, well, you know what they want, and they start building out programs, they start spending money, they start using the scarcity of volunteer time, but they've never asked the people that are going to be the consumers of their programs or their benefits what they really want. This is really critical. It also follows basic market research principles that you want to offer, if you're a for-profit company, you want to offer the products and services that your consumers want. You want to fill a niche. You're doing the same as chapter leaders. You're filling a niche for your members and the folks that are part of your chapter community. So you want to offer programs and benefits that the members tell you that they want, not the ones that you think they want. That little switch has a tremendous impact. And it also, limits the amount of time and energy you have to spend to deliver a lot of value. There's all kinds of ways that you can collect input. So a lot of times folks say, oh gosh, this is going to be really hard to get the data I need to make these decisions and to be informed. It's not that hard. There's lots of ways and tools to use, surveys. Every time you have an event, leave a little feedback form on folks' chairs. Let them fill it out before they leave the room, before they leave the event. Interviews, casual conversations. Again, if you're a chapter leader, take 3 people in your chapter roster in the course of a month and just call them up and talk to them and say, hey, how's it going? What do you want to see from our chapter going forward, and things like that. I really love to focus on what I call the outliers. So as chapter leaders or as leaders of the organization, you get a panoramic view of who's in your group. Did you run an event and there's this really energetic new member that shows up every time at your event? Well, maybe, find a time in a networking break and say, why are you here? Why are you so excited to be here? What's going on? You also probably know, Steve and Mary used to come to every chapter event. We don't see them anymore. What happened to them? Call them up. Say, hey, Steve and Mary, where'd you go? You used to be regulars at our events. And they might say, well, we came because they were adding value, and then you stopped, they stopped being interesting, or they weren't, really delivering what we wanted. Or sometimes people show up and they're just, sitting in the back corner and not paying attention, and say, hey, is there something going on, or could we deliver content in a different way that helps you pay attention? So when in doubt, again, don't guess, ask. And there's so many little simple things and simple ways that you can get information that's really valuable to help steer the course to deliver programs and benefits to your chapter members that can be really consequential. Differentiate your program or your programming. So I get the question a lot. I use my little hummingbird friend in presentations a lot, and I get the question like, well, why this picture on this slide? You don't get hummingbirds unless you are attracting them with what they want. They want sugar water. So if you put out a regular bird feeder, you're going to get probably lots of other birds. You're going to get finches and woodpeckers and things like that. But if you want a hummingbird, you have to be very specific and deliberate to get the hummingbird. I really feel the same way about the programming that groups offer to their members. I want to clarify this. One size fits all benefits and programs, they're important. You need to do them, especially as chapters. You need to find ways to bring your chapter members together, your community together, and things like that. What I mean is that if you just stop at thinking about everything that you do as a chapter as a one-size-fits-all approach, you're probably leaving opportunity on the table, and you're probably missing opportunities to connect and engage different parts of your chapter community. If you think about it, and this doesn't have to be a deep strategic challenge, every group of people, even the folks in this room, probably have some natural subgroupings among them. And as chapter leaders, just step back from looking at your members as just one block of people and say, are there obvious subdivisions among our groups? For example, we've challenged some of the groups that we work with, and we've come up with really simple tweaks that have had really tremendous benefit. We've seen associations and clients of our organizations start networking events for women that have expanded well beyond the walls of their own association and have folded in those of other associations. We've seen another organization create sort of a master's seminar for senior executives. So this is an interesting example. We were working with one association that they had an annual conference. They brought everyone to the annual conference. They had one track of activity through the conference. And the conference attendance started to wane over the years, and we started to peel back in there. We looked at, again, going to the last slide, we looked at the data. And the data found that they had really like 3 or 4 different tiers of experience across their members that went to the annual meeting. So what we did is we helped them reshape their annual conference agenda. And for some parts of the day, they had a one-size-fits-all program or speaker. And then they broke up into different workshops based on the experience level of their attendees. They had a workshop for newcomers. They had a workshop for what they call their master's level participants. And what that helped them do is differentiate their programming and add a lot of value for people where they were at in their careers. Now, as a chapter, you may not have the ability to do that at that level, but you could offer, maybe slightly different things to the audience of members that you have. And then, you can make it kind of fun. You don't have to be limited to professional affinities. If you just happen to be networking, you're a chapter leader and you happen to hear that, a lot of people in your group seem to like to run. You haven't started on this, or do yoga or play golf or whatever it is. That might be a great opportunity to say, hey, why don't we all go running every other Saturday? And it just builds camaraderie within your chapter organization. And again, the idea as chapter leaders is to find ways to bring the members of your community together. And if you can build a stickiness at the community level, it builds goodwill and stickiness at the national level. And that's where things really pick up steam. Customer experience. We've all had this waiter. When you're doing things as a chapter, I've had a lot of experience in customer experience, and I'm a big proponent. I go out to a restaurant, I'm out on the street, I always think about the customer experience and all the little things that can be done to make an experience better. At the end of the day, what customer experience research will say is that customers recall their overall experience rather than each component, but each component obviously contributes to the whole. So as a chapter leader, let's say you're running an event in your local chapter and you get some feedback. Which one would you rather have? Hey, this was a good presentation, full stop, done. Or, wow, what a night, good presentation, awesome location, amazing food. I'd rather have the second one. And the second one is almost guaranteed to bring people back the next time. And that doesn't mean that you can always deliver an awesome location and an amazing food, the point of this slide is to be thoughtful as much as you can, and as much as you have choice, and as much as you have selection, to try to think about, is there anything we can do to make a little tweak to make this more enjoyable, more fun, and things like that. And go to the last bullet here. This can be really small, and sometimes it's thinking about what to avoid as much as it's thinking about what to add. We've all been here, right? We go through our workday, we know we have a professional event coming up at the end of it, and we're sitting in rush hour traffic, we're getting stressed, we're like, oh my gosh, we're getting hungry. You know, is there a way to push your event back an hour and give people a more relaxed way to get to your event rather than dealing with rush hour traffic? You know, think about the venue that you're having your event. You know, we've all been there as well of, you know, we're driving around the parking lot for 20 minutes while the event just started. You know, think about, you know, can we find a venue that has easy parking, easy access for our thing. Owners building security where, you know, it's harder to get into the event than it is to get through the airport. So again, customer experience is about, you know, how do people feel when they've been through, you know, had a touch point with your community or your chapter. And that could be, you know, whether through an online engagement, it could be through an event or anything. And if people generally feel good and positive about the touch point that they had, they're gonna come back for more. If they feel negative about a touch point, they might think twice about it. And they have a lot of, you know, the thing about chapters is there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of other things people can do with their time. So if you create friction in their experience of dealing with your chapter and being participants, they may not come back. So you want to be really thoughtful about not only what you do, but how you do it. Identify and grow talent. So I love the content on this slide, and I'm a really firm believer that, you know, leadership is the attribute that makes all organizations better and stronger. Succession planning. So a lot of you might look at this and say, well, this is like a TBI board thing. We don't have to do succession planning. I would challenge that. I would say every chapter organization should do some form of succession planning. Again, this can be simple, it can be really informal, but it's a matter of saying, you know, if you have a small group of chapter leaders, who's coming into our group over the next couple of years? Look down the road 10 years and say, are we, you know, do we recognize individuals, you know, 10 years from now that could be sitting in our seats? And do we see individuals in our chapter that 10 years from now could be on the TBI board or in TBI leadership positions? This is where it starts. It starts at the chapter level, and, you know, generally speaking, in a lot of associations, people that were leaders at the component level end up being leaders of the whole organization, and it's a great experience to get there. You always want to make sure you're using your leadership roles to bring new ideas and perspectives into your chapter or your regional group, even your whole organization. And a lot of times what we see is that when you have chapter leaders that have been, you know, sitting in their leadership seats for a really long time, new ideas stop emerging. And it doesn't mean that you're not a good leader, it doesn't mean that you don't have good ideas, but you get stuck. So find ways, again, through sort of the succession planning idea to say, you know, maybe it's adding a new role, or maybe it's giving a volunteer a chance to run something on their own instead of being a formal part of your group. But always find ways to bring different ideas and perspectives and mix it up. You know, maybe, you know, someone that's new to the organization, someone that's new in their career in the organization. Sometimes they bring the most wonderful perspective. And then you have to recognize that all leaders start somewhere, and that's okay. And this really ties into here. You know, sometimes you might have a very energetic young person in your chapter, and you might say, hey, let's bring that energy into our leadership. But when you do that, you have to be okay with the fact that they might have some gaps in their, you know, in their learning and their experience, and you want to be okay if they take risks and make mistakes. This is where they should do it, right? This is where they're going to learn. And then the other thing is, if you've been, you know, a leader of a chapter, or you've moved out of that role and you've moved into, you know, a broader TEI leadership, please take time to coach and mentor those that have come in behind you. This can be one of the most rewarding and enriching things to do in your career. And really, I think, when I look at, the attributes that go into being a chapter leader or being a board member of an organization like TEI, that's a chance to do some of the best professional development, outside of the actual content of what you do in your career. And great leaders really benefit from having other great leaders help coach and mentor them. So if you're not currently doing this, do it. If you're new in your role as a chapter leader, reach out to someone that's been in that role before and ask them to coach and mentor you. No matter, one of the most valuable things for me, even at my stage in the career, is tapping my coaching and mentoring network, because I learned so much from them every single conversation that I had. Last one, acquire and share knowledge. So research is really clear that successful teams and organizations excel at sharing knowledge and passing knowledge amongst them. And teams that struggle, or organizations that comprise multiple teams, don't do that. So obviously, what we want to encourage is chapters and teams and groups to share knowledge wherever they can. Do something great in your chapter. You had a really great event, you did something really fun, you got some great feedback from your members, share it. And again, this is where little tiny steps can make a big impact. If a chapter figured out how to do something tremendous, and then it offered that as sort of a playbook for other chapters to just grab and emulate, now you have multiple chapters across the TEI universe that are doing something excellent. And that starts contributing to repeatable success. On the contrary, let's say, as chapter leaders, you're saying, well, geez, it seems like we really have we have a lot of new, younger members in our chapter. Geez, I wish there was a way to engage them or energize them. You're brainstorming, you're thinking about it, but what if there's a way that, you can just tap the broader set of TEI chapter leaders and say, hey, folks, does anyone else have a lot of new, younger folks in their chapter? Have any of you done anything that's really fun or engaging with them that's kind of worked? So again, you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. And again, it gets back to the biggest worry I always have of leaders in any station just sitting in a little room or at a little table trying to figure it out themselves. The beauty of communities is that you don't have to figure it out yourselves. There should be active sharing and learning among you to do that. If you don't know where to go to share ideas, for an organization that has the benefit of a staff at the national level, talk to the staff. They're almost always a great conduit. They have their pulse on what's happening in different chapters, who different chapter leaders are. And I know Tanya, you and Brenda are always at the ready to be helpful there. So you don't have to guess, you don't have to go it alone. Here at TEI, you have the value of staff to help you. So that is the conclusion of my presentation, but I wanted to pause for any questions, and I'm happy to kind of go back on any of the points and expand on it, or if you have any challenges in your local chapter that might connect even loosely to any of the concepts here, I'm happy to answer those questions for you. Yeah, go ahead.
So, as we've come out of the pandemic, how have you advised clients around the mix between in-person and online training? Because with budgets, online, there clearly needs to be a hybrid approach.
Yeah.
But how do you keep engagement, notwithstanding that? Because obviously the interpersonal relationships are stronger when you have a in-person contact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what we've seen is, certainly more groups reclaiming that the physical events, whether it's training or whether it's just networking events and things like that, and those are fantastic. But what we're coaching our client organizations and other associations is probably an effective strategy is to retain both to a degree for now. So what the pandemic kind of taught a lot of organizations is that you can still deliver value and you can still reach folks in your community remotely, but you know, obviously you don't want to just live in only the remote world. I personally feel that I'll call them hybrid events are really challenging because they kind of dilute value for both the people on site and the people online. And what we've seen more effective is to be very deliberate about it and say, okay, we're gonna have maybe every other month an in-person training or an in-person presentation, and then in between we're gonna have an online presentation only. You know, there's no in-person component. And that allows you to be really good at delivering that piece of it. You know, there's a different strategy for an online only thing and a different strategy for an in-person thing. And when you try to do a little bit of both, it tends not to work that great. So that's one thing that we've really seen. But what we've also seen is, you know, to some of the points, you know, by doing both and being deliberate about both, you should be able to connect with a broader set of people from your chapter community. You know, even if they're just traveling within a region, you know, there's, you know, so we're out of the pandemic, but now we're into maybe a new era of financial tightness for a lot of organizations. So people, you know, if they have to travel a little bit, might say, and now people, you know, their kids are also out back at, you know, events after school or sporting events. So their ability or willingness to travel after work and go to a dinner or something like that might be minimized. And they say, hey, I kind of got used to and like this idea. I can do my training online, you know, later at night when the kids are in bed, after dinner and things like that. So my experience is keep both as a strategy, but don't try to conflate them because it kind of gets confused and not a great product. Yeah.
You mentioned focusing on outliers.
Yeah.
And I want to understand a little bit more about that in terms of when does an exception create a rule, and how do you balance what most people want versus what outliers want?
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to create exceptions. You don't want to run your organization by exceptions too. Like when I do strategic planning, one of the things that we'll almost always do is we'll do about 15 or 20 interviews with the stakeholders of that organization. And about 12 of them will be very straightforward. They'll be board members, they'll be staff leaders and things like that. And then the other 8 or so will be those outliers, right? So that kind of represents the balance. And the outliers, again, in that strategic planning example would be, you know, give me 2 members who are completely disengaged or who tend to be really negative about everything in the organization. Give me 2 people that left the organization in the last year, because I want to know why did they leave, what's their perspective about it. And then give me the names of 2 people, let's say, that you know are not in this organization but should be. And why haven't they joined? So the idea there, if you kind of think about it as a balance, the people that are in and deep and kind of probably more positive to the organization are the bigger core, and then the outliers, you know, are. But if you don't have that outlier perspective, then you're just kind of talking in a vacuum generally for the people that are already engaged, already in leadership roles in your organization. So yeah, you're very right. You don't want your outliers to cloud your perspective and you start running in the direction that they want to be, because that's probably not the product you want to build. But it's to make sure that you don't miss the opportunity to hear their perspective when you're building plans and thinking about things.
And on a related point with the surveys, lots, not always, but people that respond to surveys that add comments are usually one side or the other side.
Yes,
So how
correct.
do you get real good data from surveys that aren't really statistical data sampling?
Yeah, and you know, that's okay. So it, you know, and not every bit of data that comes in has to be something that you respond to, right? But it's more that you're in the hygiene of asking people their opinion at the end of the thing, and it also goes into the customer experience. So if you just leave an event or you leave a session and you leave the door, like, okay, but what you might find is, you know, maybe people loved that session, and maybe, you know, for that particular event, you know, it wasn't some people liked it, some people didn't. Everyone loved it. It's great to have that feedback, right? So just being in the hygiene of collecting feedback, it doesn't mean that you always do something with every bit of feedback, but it allows you to see kind of the macro trends. And it's just a good hygiene or practice to be in as a chapter leader. And I think it enriches or endears members to your community and says, hey, these people care. They want to know what I think, good, bad, or otherwise. Yeah.
So with, I think a lot of chapters, we struggle with trying to get, this succession planning, the next group of volunteers. I know for our chapter, it always seems to come down to this kind of a last minute type of thing. What are suggestions that you would say for becoming more deliberate with trying to recruit volunteers in succession planning?
Yeah, so one thing that I've seen work pretty well is to try to bring newcomers, new potential leaders into small responsibilities. So, you know, getting back to kind of goal setting and longer term planning. So, you know, within your chapter, you might have an idea of everything you're gonna do for the year. And what you might wanna do is rather than think about, hey, how do we bring a new person into all of what we're doing? Look at each little thing that you're doing, each event or each training or something like that, and see if you can bring in a new volunteer to be part of the planning for that particular thing. And it allows them to get their feet wet, and it allows you as leaders to see, hey, how did they respond? Did they step up? Did they bring in new ideas? Are they energetic? Or they raised their hand and said, yeah, I'd be interested, then they never showed up to any calls. It allows you to test, and it's kind of like, it allows them to kind of staircase up to a different level of responsibility. The thing that I see a lot and what I hear a lot from organizations is making the jump from not being an active volunteer leader to being an all-in volunteer leader can be overwhelming. And even, you know, while they consider it, it's like, wow, it just seems like a lot of time that I don't have. But if they can kind of test that and say, well, I was pretty active in the planning of this networking event, and it was kind of fun, I enjoyed it. Now they've taken a little step, they got their feet wet, and you as the core leaders get to say, yeah, wow, you know, that person was really fantastic. Let's find a way to, you know, maybe try to encourage them to do more. But, you know, volunteer leader burnout is a real thing, and it goes both ways. So if you're not developing those leaders, you're going to be carrying the load for a long time and probably getting a little tired and cranky about it at some point. Yeah.
So thanks so much for sharing your insights. It's been incredibly helpful to me. I really appreciated your point about data and collecting data rather than assuming you know what people want. So if I'm collecting just informal data after an event, and let's say there's about 50 people at the event, do you have a general rule of thumb for how many people you approach and get their input after the event to feel comfortable that you kind of have a good coverage for the entire thing?
Yeah, you know, generally speaking, this is, so one of the services that our company offers is events management, events planning. So it's something that we build into all of our scopes of work when we're doing an event. Like we have to get the after event feedback from participants. Generally speaking, feedback from event attendees tends to be notably higher than it is if you just do a membership survey or things like that, because you have your attendees kind of closed caption. And events also are interesting because you know, people are together, they're going through the same experience. Generally speaking, you know, so the response rate around events should be, you know, probably higher. I don't have, you know, an immediate number of what a good response is, but I can actually follow that up and I can share it with Tanya or Brenda about that because my team does a lot of that work. And again, you're going to get to the fellow's point here, you're probably going to get 2 data points. I mean, you'll see overall trend lines, but you know, you get people that just because they were together with other people and they got some great time, you know, networking at the happy hours, there's a lot of goodwill that happens in in-person events. The other thing that can be really good is to be more granular. Again, the more differentiated you can do it, you know, was the event overall really good, but get feedback per session. Was the content in this session good? Was it on point? And that's where you can also start to collect, you know, more granular information about, hey, what level of career are you at? Are you, you know, a very senior, you know, tax executive? Are you new in your career? And then you can kind of cross-section that and say, wow, that session really got high marks from the senior tax executives, but I think we confused the newbies. So on a, you know, I think if you can collect it on a more granular basis without being onerous in terms of, you know, each session, you'll get a different perspective than a macro level event survey. And, you know, unless the food was really terrible and you didn't serve enough drinks, the macro level generally tends to be pretty good, especially now post-pandemic. People are excited to be back. But I think you really want to be kind of specific about how people feel about the content that you're delivering and whether it's on the mark for them. So I hope that helps.
Yeah.
But I'll follow up about kind of some post-event strategies from our events team, and you know that might be something good to share out with chapter leaders.
Awesome.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and again, I hope this helps even just a little bit to help your chapters run better and have an impact for TDI. So great to see you all, and have a great rest of the day. So thank you.
I think our next, our giving session is happening downstairs at the lower level where registration.